Mishmash! Kitbash Corner!
Hey, today we're going to be kitbashing some custom-made Iron Warriors. After combing through my Discord, it's pretty blatantly clear that a lot of my fanbase likes the Iron Warriors, and I can understand why. Amongst the various Chaos Space Marine warbands, the Iron Warriors really are their own thing. Their lack of full-blown chaoticness, or whatever you want to call it, and their depictions in the art really give them their own unique design philosophy, which is something I believe the generic Chaos Space Marine line does not reflect all too well. But that's the point of this video. Today we're going to be using some deathguard Marines to kitbash our own unique Iron Warriors. Fair warning, we're going to be denurgling these guys. I hope you can bear to witness it. But before we get into it, make sure you leave a like, comment, and subscribe, share it with a friend, and if you really dig it, consider becoming a channel member. For just $3 a month, you get to see my videos early, and for $5, you get access to a weekly Q&A in which I will showcase your miniatures. Along with this, you get access to unique roles and channels within the Mishmash Discord, you get to see sneak peeks, and you can send in your minis. Just want to give a huge thank you to my channel members. You guys are amazing. Also, if you're interested in anything Wargames Atlantic related, especially Quar, you can use my affiliate link down below, and you can plug my discount code MISHMASH5% to save 5% off your purchase. But enough of the promotional stuff, let's get to the kit bashing. So like I mentioned, I'm going to be using Plague Marines for these guys, and I'm actually using some that were given to me by a good friend. I'm sorry, I know I was going to use this for a Deathguard army, but they're serving a pretty good purpose. First thing we're going to want to do is start slicing away at the bits that'll be easiest to remove. This being nurgly icons, tentacles, maggots, as well as any sort of extra plague bits that are just not really fitting for the Iron Warriors. I really did want to leave the stick grenade, but it's just not fitting. I am going to be diligent to really remove everything Plague Marine-esque, and part of that is just removing full parts of the body, but it's not really something that you gotta worry about too much. We'll get into the more finer details of really sanding this guy down later on as we get further into the kitbash. Now the biggest thing that we're going to need to do is to fill in some of these areas using a little bit of sprue goo. I'm not going to go full crazy with it, as some of these parts and scratches in the armor actually work to the advantage of the figure, but some of these areas definitely do have a sign of pestilence, as well as some nasty rot in some of the creases, so for the most part I do want to fill these parts in. Now one thing I do want to mention is I actually still have the backpack for the Plague Marine still on the figure, but eventually I would remove this later on. I think it would have worked overall, but there's just something about the wings of the backpack that I don't think quite fit Iron Warriors. You can still use this for notes, obviously, it does show how I would fill this in, but yeah, I would change it over time. Also figure I mentioned I am using drive-bys of pure Tamiya just to really smooth things out. Sometimes I went a little too heavy with the sprue goo, so the Tamiya really did smooth things out. And for when it really gets out of hand, I had to sand things down. I was going to do this anyway, so it really isn't anything that's actually hindering the detail of the model. It's all part of the plan. But after a little bit of the sanding, we're going to be adding our first new detail to the figure. I decided to utilize this little chain that's attached to the groin area, and I would fit on a regular old skull. It would be pretty easy to remove this, but I do think it looks a lot cooler to have this decoration here. It kind of breaks things up, and it allows me to paint more bright colors as opposed to the kind of dark metallics. But moving on, we're now going to be shaving down parts of the legs, especially in the joint regions, as there are plenty of little extra creepy details that are just not fitting for Iron Warriors. Especially these parts that are kind of bursting freely from the armor itself. Now I would recommend, if you really wanted to probably use green stuff as opposed to sprue goo to really tidy up these details, but I didn't really want to, just wasn't feeling it. And definitely not saying this as a cop-out, but I do think Iron Warriors leave a little wiggle room for some jank armor types. Now just a little detail I want to mention, this little faucet nozzle thing attached to the abdomen, I was initially going to sand off and carve out of the miniature, but I thought it looked cool, so I decided to use my X-Acto knife and I would drill into it to kind of reapply the inner hollowed design, as I kind of sanded over it and clogged up the detail. Obviously, if you want to, you could leave this off, or you could completely sand it down, but I don't know, I kind of like how it looks. Now for his arms, I'm using the main arm from the original Plague Marine that I was using after the icon was shaved off, But for his left arm, I'm using one from the old Mark III set, the 2016 version. Personal taste, I think the 2016 ones are actually better than the modern ones. I don't even dislike the modern ones, it just feels like the 2016 ones fit Mark III better. They really feel more ancient as opposed to the newer version, which feels a little too smooth for my taste. Still cool, but just not Mark III in my eyes. However, I did say that I don't dislike this armor, so I actually ended up using a backpack from the newer Mark IIIs. I love both, but I do think the newer version is a little bit more burly and it fits this body type better than the older version. But once I was happy with that, I would fit on his helmet, and I would use one from the newer Chaos lines. Kinda feels weird to say that out loud. As much as I'm not a huge fan of the newer Chaos Space Marine kits, this helmet did seem fitting. It has a very limited amount of Chaos trim, and the Servo Eye monocle is really fitting for Iron Warriors. I definitely have a soft spot for the older kits, but this one is fitting, and I gotta give credit where credit's due. But for the final bit, I decided to give him a Thunder Hammer. Part of me kinda wonders if I should have just given him an open palm hand to make him more of a generic bolt gun marine, because I'll admit I do kinda want to make more of these guys. But all in all, I think both ways would have looked awesome, so I'm really not losing sleep over it. But hey, I think it's about time we move on to Marine number 2. So for our second Iron Warrior, you can probably notice that this guy is pretty barren as opposed to the first one. I believe this guy was equipped with a Plague Spewer, so I decided that was a little bit more than I was willing to convert, so everything had to go. Like with our first guy, first thing we want to do is remove everything Nurgly, and this guy has some pretty harsh bits that were difficult to remove. But using the good old X-Acto knife, we can carve these details off pretty easily. However, I will admit some of these areas on this model were kind of carved away a little too much. I will say some of the trim was accidentally sliced off, and I'm not exactly happy with that. It doesn't look terrible, but one of my favorite parts of Iron Warriors is that complementary brass color that they have for the trim. So I was a little grumpy that I kind of deprived myself of painting more of that, but it's not the end of the world. But once I was done removing the main spike from the backpack, I would then begin filling in some of the areas using the sprue goo once more. This time it was a little bit more difficult as some of the holes of the Plague and Pestilence were on very angular areas, so I decided to use some of these to my advantage for bullet holes and just overall natural corrosion on the model. Also, in contrast to the first model, this guy I'm actually leaving his backpack attached. This one definitely works a lot better for Iron Warriors compared to the first one. But there's also part of me that does kind of wish I added another Mark III, but it wouldn't be as interesting to you guys, and at the same time he's already painted, so spaghettios. Now for his weaponry, I decided to give him one of the bolt guns and arms from the regular Chaos Space Marine kit. This bolt gun didn't really have a lot of Chaos trim on it, so I felt it was fitting thematically, though in terms of actually fitting on the model, it's a little loosey-goosey. So as opposed to using Tamiya, I would super glue the arms on and I would fill in the gaps using some Tamiya. Once they were secure, I would add on some older Chaos Space Marine pauldrons, this coming from the vintage kit. Also, I didn't really realize this until now that almost all of my extra bits are things that I've previously painted and then gave up on. I probably should strip some of these bits, but I'm lazy, so yeah. Anyway, the second pauldron on the right arm actually isn't from the old Chaos Marines kit. This one comes from the Khorne Berserkers kit, the old one in which our old friend Wally comes from. This pauldron really did look similar to the Iron Warrior skull logo, so I thought it would be kind of a cool idea. I'm pretty happy with it overall. And for his melon, I decided to use one of the old Mark IIIs. This one was actually attached to one of the other figures, and I decided to add it to this guy as he's not nearly as burly as his brothers. So the Sharp Mark III felt more fitting for this guy. And I'm really happy that I decided on this rather than the other figure, this being the last one, because this just feels way more fitting. Though I do love the kind of gimmicky and burly armor types I used for the other two figures, this guy, in my opinion, is the best representation of an Iron Warrior. Chaos Undivided Mark IIIs. That's basically the view I have in my head when I think of Iron Warriors. But for the final detail of the figure, I decided to seal up the backpack using a combination of sprue goo and the raggedy, kinda tattered up rockets that you get with the basic bitch Chaos kit. I probably could have done something different, but I'm actually really happy with how this looks. Doesn't really make much sense because he doesn't have a rocket launcher, but I don't know. Considering they have kind of the ragtag junk heap vibe going, I don't think it's too out of the question that this guy would carry around extra magazines and rockets and ammunition for his brothers. And above everything else, it does its job as kind of fixing that little bald spot on the backpack. And though I did say that was the final detail, the actual final detail is this nice little cloth tabard with an ammo pouch. Again, another reason why I do think the modern Chaos Kit benefits from the vintage one. Man, I do gotta say, I am getting a little bit low on these bits. I've had a couple of sprues from ages ago, and now I'm starting to near towards the end. But with that, our second Marine is complete. And I gotta say, this guy kind of started out as my least favorite of the three, but after viewing him more and more through the editing process, he's definitely a lot more different than I was expecting him to be, but I think that's a good thing. In the pursuit of trying to create more thematically fitting Iron Warriors, this guy seems to be the most fitting of the three. But I'll let you guys form your own opinion. Let's get to number 3. For the leader of the group, well, I guess I already gave one of them a power weapon, but it don't matter, none of this matters. This guy is actually a Marine I've had sitting around for a very long time. I want to say this is from a box of Plague Marines that I pre-ordered in 2017, so yeah, it's about time that this guy gets some love. I say guy, but he is not assembled at all whatsoever. It's basically just a Plague Marine body. I think that's another thing that I wanted to mention when it came to kitbashing these guys. I was a little limited by the actual Plague Marine bodies. The amount of Plague Marines that just have gigantic mouths instead of actual rot is kind of mind-boggling. Huge hot take, I think the push-fit Plague Marines are infinitely better than the actual customizable Plague Marines. I don't know, I just feel like rot and tentacles aren't exactly intertwined. Just not something I think is a really, I don't know. I know I should be talking about the miniature, but I think you get the picture at this point. We're just cleaning off all the Plague bits. Though I will have to say, this one out of all the Plague Marine bodies I found was probably the most perfect for what I was going for in terms of the burliness. Sure, there were plenty of areas that needed a little tidying up, but otherwise this guy was actually really easy to work with. But again, I will mention that there were some areas where the trim was a little cut off, and I'm not exactly happy with it, but it turned out pretty good in the end. The biggest issue really is trimming off areas and weapons from the Marines. A lot of the stick grenade heads are really the biggest hindrance when it comes to actually getting these guys looking as clean as possible. And the big problem is they are kind of weird and wonky to actually cover up. Sometimes I would use grenades, but it's not like Marines are going to have grenades sitting off of their knees. Unless it is a stick grenade. I don't know, maybe I should have found something to actually replace the head of the stick grenade instead of just slicing it off completely. I don't know. I was gonna say that it doesn't really matter, they're already built, but these guys were fun, I kinda want to make more of them. So maybe we'll see that in another future episode. Another thing I did want to mention is though I did seal up a lot of the plague-ridden pox holes, or whatever you want to call them, the suds, I did actually end up drilling into some of them to create more bullet hole-like designs, to create less of a perfect sphere and more of a jagged edge. I don't know, maybe it looks a little superfluous, but I do kind of like how it looks as opposed to the natural rot state. It's more of a thing of it just looks different to me because maybe I applied it myself. I don't know. Whether or not it's a placebo remains to be seen, but I don't know. I think it looks cool. But switching gears, we're now adding things onto the figure, and to start, I'm giving him this lightning claw from the old Mark III set. And alongside of it, you can see the original Mark III that I gave our secondary friend. Again, just ignore that, I just don't think this helmet fit the body. But for his pauldron, I used another Mark III, and I used a very cool jagged Mark III from the actual Plague Marines kit. His arm, however, comes from the vintage Chaos kit. I find the old burly plasma pistols to be way more fitting for Iron Warriors rather than the more slimmed down designs in the Chaos kits now. Not that they're bad by any means, I just think this was something that I had personal preference for. Plus, having a fully constructed arm as one bit was really useful. Again, ignore the very bright silver pauldron. I don't even remember what this was for. But regardless, I really like that I found this bit. It's a perfect fit, it adds a little bit more to the other side of the armor. And now I want to give him a little trophy, this being a Space Marine head. Of course, during the shot, his big-ass power claw blocked everything, so sorry about that. But in the next shot, you'll see that I actually ended up clipping down the head significantly, and I actually ended up using the stick of the stick grenade to my advantage. I used it more of a chain to the helmet rather than an actual stick grenade. Love Imperial Fists, but I feel like every 1 in 3 Iron Warrior figure needs to have an Imperial Fist effigy, so yeah, that's the one. Now that I'm happy with how things are looking, I decided to use a little Tamiya to kind of smooth out the belly. There's plenty of little plastic shavings on there, so I decided using just a little bit to kind of smooth things out was necessary. But like I mentioned, finally decided to remove the Mark III, and I'm replacing it using this awesome helmet from the Chaos Rhino set. I love this helmet. This is my favorite Chaos Marine helmet ever. I love the other designs of it too that came in the old Chaos Marine kit. This burly, non-chaos trimmed helmet really reeks of chaos without having all these jagged edges. I don't know, there's something about it that just speaks to me. It looks like Conrad from Berserk. Also at this point I'm realizing this looks like if Dr. Robotnik made a Chaos Marine. But as one final little detail, I decided to use a little bit of sprue goo on the trophy helmet, mostly just working it in between the knee pad and the actual helmet, and I would fit in just a little bit of extra Skitarii tubing to create some mechanical gibberish. At first it was going to be gore, but I think just using it as extra tubing from the helmet itself works a little bit better. I don't really want it to look like a fresh kill, I want it to look like an old trophy. Well, with that, our 3 Iron Warriors are complete, and the only regret I have is I didn't make more of them. I don't think I would have finished them in time for the video, I certainly wouldn't have them painted. But man, these guys are so much fun to work with. I kinda have some more ideas using Terminator armor and Cataphractii armor, but that might be a different episode. I should also mention, if you guys are interested in how I paint Iron Warriors, I actually have an entire video dedicated to it, so if you want to check that out afterwards, I would really appreciate that. But as one little final announcement, I want to mention I'm actually attending LVO next week. I'm going to be heading out there with Mr. Bones and the crew, and we're going to have a gay old time. I'm going to try my best to have another episode of Old School ready for next week, but I'm also planning on filming the event and our little adventures, so expect that in the next coming weeks. But I've definitely flapped my beak enough for one video. If you liked what you saw, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, share it with a friend, and remember to mishmash, kitbash, and paint some fantastic miniatures. And you're gonna. I promise. See ya.